Hey, before I really get into this video, I just need to give a quick little preface. I know the thumbnail and the title are dramatic about this being the hardest video I've ever made, but that is the truth. I don't actually want to share this with you, frankly. So I'm very passionate, as you may have noticed, about this whole carnivore eating meat thing. My young adult years were filled with, yes, I was obese. I also had a lot of sternum pain, costochondritis. I had repeated boils. I had chronic acne. I suffered with a lot of anxiety, especially at night. I just, I was not doing well, not thriving. And then I started eating this way, and oh my word, sure, I lost 130 pounds. And I also got rid of so much inflammation. My blood sugar is steady. I have good energy. My fertility returned. I had 3 babies. Like, it's changed my whole life. I never want to say anything that would make someone not want to give this a try. I think every single person who is not thriving on their standard American or low fat or any other diet, plant-based, vegan or vegetarian, whatever you're not thriving on, I would say give it a good 90 days. See if you don't feel so much better. And I work with hundreds of people every month. I have groups that are full of people who just celebrate. This is it. I tried it and I feel so much better. And they can just list every single meeting is like a great tent revival of meat, the great meat revival, talking about how much better they feel. We literally praise the Lord. We feel so good. That's where my heart is. And then, and then a good friend of mine, I'm going to describe in this video, something bad happened to a carnivore friend of mine, and it kind of rocked my world. In this carnivore community, we often hear, you don't really need to worry about getting your heart checked or tests. You don't need meds. We are eating the best human diet. Agreed. Yes. So in this video, we will talk through how could this have happened to my friend? Is there anything that could have prevented it? Sort of the thought process behind should she continue eating this carnivore diet even after what happened? We'll get into all of that. A couple of things I want to throw out there. I don't know how long I'm going to live. I started eating this carnivore diet when I was 25 years old, fully carnivore at age 30. I am now about to turn 46. I've never felt better. I make no promises about, hitting 120 someday. I sometimes joke that I plan to throw a big party, invite all of you, mark your calendars. There will be bacon. It's going to be great. But in truth, I don't know. I could die tomorrow. Before you hear Cindy's story, I first want to say, even though I cannot make any promises about my longevity, I am mortal. I will pass this earth. I am also very ready to do so, though not necessarily in any hurry to go like right away. I'm ready. And regardless of how long I'm going to live, I know that eating this way has given me the best quality of life. If I knew I were going to live longer eating the low fat, low calorie, carby diet that I was on before, but I had to feel like I did before, no deal. Nope, pass. I'm going this way because I want every day that I live, I want to be uninflamed, not addicted, feeling energetic, and just able to live my best life. That's what the carnivore diet has done for me. So when we hear of something bad happening to someone, it can kind of, rattle our cage a little bit. Like I thought this was supposed to be the protector but in truth, my diet is not my protector. It's not, but I have one. My diet is not my savior, but I have one. My diet is not going to necessarily allow me to be immortal and live eternally, but my diet does allow me to feel good today. And I would encourage anyone who has uncertainty about the future, we all do, no one knows, to focus on, all right, but what about today, in this moment? What could make me feel better today and tomorrow? And, I can't make any promises about when I'm 80. I think I am making the best choices that I possibly can for longevity, but I know that I'm making the best choices for my life and what allows me to thrive in this moment. So I hope this video is helpful. It would be very easy for me to sweep this under a rug and be like, let's just pretend this never happened. And I assure you, I thought about it. But in the end, I think the conversation around this is important. So with no further dilly-dallying, I present Dr. Ovadia. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Hogan. Welcome back to my Zero Carb Life. And I have the honor and privilege of having Dr. Philip Ovadia, author of Stay Off My Operating Table, back for a third time. There are very few people I've had on 3 times. Welcome back, Dr. Ovadia.
It is so great to be back here with you again, Kelly. I'm honored to hear that I'm climbing up the list of appearances, but love interacting with you and your great community. So happy to be here yet again.
Thank you. Now, this is absolutely no offense to you whatsoever, because I adore you or I wouldn't have had you back again. But I don't know if I have ever been any less excited about a topic. And you kind of know why, but I'm going to give people, I have a few notes here, a little bit of a backstory. And I don't want to scare anybody off with this interview, but I also want to share a story that I wish wasn't true. And I wish I did not have to tell. A few weeks ago, one of my really good friends, her name is Cindy. I have her permission to use her first name. She has been carnivore for nearly 5 years. It'll be 5 years in October. She just had a near fatal heart attack. And doctor, I have some serious questions. So just to give you a little background, she'll be 69 years old next month. She is a very normal body weight now. She's gorgeous and glowing. She's never smoked a day in her life. She did keto for a few years and then switched to carnivore about 5 years ago. She never cheats. And she's made that very clear to me. She's not like a Monday through Friday carnivore. She's like, no, I am hardcore carnivore. She does not drink alcohol. She does not include dairy. So in some ways, she's even a better carnivore than I am. Like, she's really strict. She only drinks decaf coffee, no caffeine. All right. I ask her, Cindy, what do you eat as a carnivore? Burger patties, ribeye, New York strip steaks, occasionally some fatty chicken like the thighs and the wings. I ask her about her stress level. She does not seem like a stressed out person to me, to be completely honest. But she laughed. She said, my ex-husband jokes that the reason he has all the gray hair and she has none, she does not even color her hair at age 69. Her hair is as dark as mine. Okay, and I do color my hair, just to be clear. She said the reason she has no gray hair, according to her ex-husband, is she's never been stressed a day in her life. I'm like, what in the world? I asked her about her exercise. I know she's always on the move, Dr. Ovadia. She walks 3 to 5 miles outside every day. She goes to the Silver Sneakers exercise group at the gym twice every week. She rides her bike. She has close family connections, community connections. She spends tons of time running around with 8 grandchildren. And then 2 weeks ago, she had a heart attack. It was actually 2 heart attacks back to back. They had to put stents in. One of her arteries, 99% blocked, another one 80% blocked. I have her CAC scores for the last 4 years of carnivore. They were going up. I have her cholesterol numbers for the last 4 years of carnivore. They were going up. Even though her fasting glucose has stayed beautiful, as you would expect as a carnivore, her total cholesterol this year was 543. An interesting fact. I promise I'm going to hush here, y'all, and let him talk. But she aced her stress test, as in, like, wow, completed it, did a fantastic, got a great score. I've seen it. And then had the heart attack about 48 hours later. So I talked to Cindy. I said, look, I feel like this is a really important interview because I know she has questions. I said, babe, me too now. I've got some serious questions because I feel like in her honor, and thankfully, not her memory, in her honor, I'm a little bit appalled because I want to believe carnivore can just fix everything. Like, just eat meat, have a nice life, see you in 100 years. You've done all you need to do. And she's even gone above and beyond. So, all right, my first questions. What could she have done differently? How could this have happened, Dr. Ovadia?
Yeah. So let's get some I guess let's get some things out of the way first,
Okay.
right? And the first one I just got to say is carnivore does not fix everything, right? I don't want people lulled into this thought that if I'm just doing carnivore, everything's going to be fine. I'm not going to get heart attacks. I'm not going to get cancer. I'm not going to get, list whatever disease it is. Carnivore is great, right? Carnivore, I believe, is
Yes.
probably the best thing that we can do from a dietary standpoint. But I don't want people thinking that carnivore is just the solution to every problem and you really don't have to worry about your health if you're doing carnivore. And even if you're doing strict carnivore like Cindy was doing, you still got to pay attention to things. And, just kind of hearing what you described, right? Hearing someone they're doing carnivore great, right? And their coronary artery calcium score is going up, right? That to me is a red flag. And I have patients in my practice like this. These are patients, this has kind of become my thing, right? If you're a carnivore and you have some concerns around your heart, a lot of times you're going to come see me, right?
Yes.
As your doctor. So you don't have to come see me as your heart surgeon ultimately. And what I tell people is we got to figure out why that calcium score is going up. Because if it's not related to the food that you're eating, and if you're eating a strict carnivore diet, I would say it's probably not related to the food that you're eating. And yeah, maybe we can start to nitpick, right? Was it all grass-fed regenerative beef, right? Was that chicken that she was eating, being fed corn and soy?
I can answer that actually. I don't want to
But
interrupt, but I can answer it wasn't. And so neither is mine. And
yeah, right.
I bet
So
most people watching are like, uh-oh, neither is mine.
yeah, and no, I don't think you need to. I don't think it
Okay.
needs to be, right? I think that
Okay.
is like crazy nitpicking that some people
Okay.
get into in the carnivore community, but I don't think you really need to be doing that. I think if you're
Okay.
eating a carnivore diet, right, and your calcium score is going up, I'm pretty confident in saying it's not your diet that's causing it to go up. So
Okay.
let's figure out what it is, right? And you mentioned some of the things, right? That Cindy, it sounds like, was doing good on as well, right? Stress,
Yeah.
sleep, alcohol, all of those can contribute. Activity, again, sounds like she was doing great. But
Yes.
there are other things, right? There are other environmental toxins that I'll point at, things like heavy metals, things like chronic low grade infections that maybe don't get picked up on. Does someone have, for instance, a chronic mold exposure that I've now diagnosed in some of my patients? Does someone have chronic Lyme disease that hasn't been recognized that I've diagnosed in some of my patients? Heavy metal toxicity is something I find not uncommonly, right? And
Okay.
this could be coming from what we're eating, right? If the cow is eating grass that's contaminated with heavy metals, right,
Yeah.
it's going to show up in the meat. Um, Heavy metals are also elsewhere in our environment, right? And so heavy metal exposure can come from other environmental things, even if you're doing a perfect carnivore diet. So these are some of the questions that we start asking. This is the reason why health is so complicated, right?
Right.
And quite frankly, as much as I don't want people to need me as a doctor, I realize that people do need me, right? Because questions like this come up. I wish that a doctor that Cindy was working with had looked at the fact that her CAC score was going up and kept asking questions until they figured out why. Because this is like the biggest thing I do in my practice now, right? Is I am a big fan of CAC scans and I get them on a yearly basis. And this is why I get them on a yearly basis. Because if that score is continuing to go up, something is amiss. We got to figure out why. The knee jerk reaction is, well, it was because her cholesterol was 500, right? It's obvious. And, I'll admit it could be related to her cholesterol. I don't think the fact that her cholesterol is 500 says that everyone with a cholesterol that high, all of the sort of lean mass hyper responders out there, need to say, well, Cindy had a heart attack and her cholesterol was 500. So a cholesterol of 500 is clearly problematic for everyone, right? But I would want to know, why was Cindy's cholesterol that high? What was the quality of her cholesterol, not what was the quantity of her cholesterol? And this is where we get into looking at particle sizes. And, people talk about pattern A versus pattern B.
Yes.
You know, digging further into Cindy's labs, did she still have inflammation? Did she still have insulin resistance? And everyone's going to say, whoa, wait, she was on carnivore for
Right.
5 years. How could she still have insulin resistance? And I'm here to tell you, I have seen longtime carnivores that still have insulin resistance. They either started with such severe insulin resistance that, they just, it wasn't enough time to reverse it, or it was too late in the process to reverse it. And so, it is possible to be a perfectly adherent long-term carnivore and still have inflammation and still have insulin resistance that can be leading to progressive, heart disease. What worries me about patients in Cindy's situation, right, is that her doctors are just going to say to her, clearly it was your cholesterol. You
Yes.
need to stop eating the way you've been eating.
Yes.
And all of those benefits that Cindy has gotten from her years of carnivore will be wiped away, right?
Yes.
And as confident as I am in saying something was going on, right, I'm fairly confident in saying that something wasn't her carnivore diet.
Right.
Something else was driving her heart disease. And for her and for patients like her, the challenge is figuring out what that is. And
Yeah.
most doctors, unfortunately, aren't up for that challenge, right? They
Right.
just want the easy answer. And the easy answer is it was her cholesterol.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that that's really the answer.
Well, yeah, we could all predict what happened immediately in the hospital after this. She wakes up, she's told, quote, "Well, carnivore just doesn't work for everyone. I'm sorry. You should not be eating this way. Your cholesterol is too high. We've got to get you on the statins and change your diet." Meanwhile, she was feeling so good. I mean, I've hung out with her in person. This woman is vivacious. She's hard to keep up with. She was having, in some ways, such improvements in her health. She doesn't want to turn away from this way of eating entirely. She's one of the biggest carnivore supporters that there is. My grandfather died of a heart attack at age 54, and I must say, not a carnivore, not even close, right? So I think it's worth noting, even carnivores still have mortality. Like,
Yeah.
we're all dying, act accordingly. But I don't love to say, hey, carnivore's not going to fix everything. But also, I fully know that it's not. And it's good to hear you list some other possibilities. I think I've asked you this before. And I know in this community, statin has become almost like the S word, like the S bomb, right? Oh no, the doctor suggested a statin. But sometimes, is that the means that you use?
Sometimes there's benefit to lowering your cholesterol, right?
Right.
Statins are not the only way to do that. So
Okay.
there are many ways that we can lower cholesterol in people on carnivore diets. For people like Cindy, reintroduction of a small amount of carbohydrate can actually have dramatic effects on your cholesterol levels. And there have been, many of the lean mass hyper responders out there. Guys like Nick Norowitz and Dave Feldman, have done experiments on themselves and shown pretty dramatic reduction in cholesterol levels when you introduce a little bit of carbohydrate.
Hmm.
And, this is where we have to also acknowledge that carnivore isn't a religion, right? We have to have latitude here. And we say, okay, maybe someone like Cindy, maybe, that cholesterol level of 500 is too high. And, if we just introduce some clean sources of carbohydrates, right?
What
Some
would be your
fibers.
top? I'm sorry, what would be your top option for that?
Yeah, I would, a baked potato, some fibrous veggies, some broccoli, some cauliflower, something like that. Depending on your situation, maybe some white rice, right? And we're not talking about huge amounts. We're talking about maybe 20, 30 grams of carbs a day. And that can help to lower cholesterol levels, right? And even on the pharmaceutical way, if we're going to go down that route, there are non-statin options today that might be better options, right? There are some concerns that are very specific to statins about the way that they lower cholesterol. And again, does everyone need to be concerned about that? No, not everyone that takes statins get these effects. I just think on average, right, the problems that I see around cholesterol management are we overstate the benefit of statins. We understate the side effects of statins. But that doesn't mean that statins play no role. And we also tend to ignore everything else because we think that statins are the answer. So, here's something to think about, right? Okay. Because there are many patients who end up with a heart attack, right? And let's say, there's an alternative universe where Cindy is walking around, right? And Cindy 20 years ago was told by her doctor, take a statin, right? And Cindy was as adherent to her statin taking as she was to carnivore.
Okay.
And Cindy's LDL cholesterol is 60, and Cindy still rolls into the hospital with a heart attack, right? And this is actually a scenario I see on a regular basis. Yeah. And no one in that situation says, you know what, Cindy, your low fat diet and your statin weren't the answer. You need to change what you're doing, right? Go start eating a carnivore diet and stop taking the statin, right?
Yeah.
Because if that's the answer to Cindy, right, on the carnivore diet, then the answer to the person with the LDL of 60 that rolls in with the heart attack should be go eat a high-fat diet and stop taking your statin. And yet we never hear that, right? And I can also tell you, and granted, I acknowledge, right, there are a lot more people doing the low-fat diet and taking their statins than there are carnivores probably in the world. Sure. But I have seen a lot more patients on low-fat diets taking their statin with cholesterols under 100 that roll in with heart attacks than I've seen carnivores that have shown up with heart attacks.
Oh, I think that's powerful to hear.
So, that's something to keep in mind, the framing around this discussion. I've also seen many people reverse and improve these conditions with these diets. So we shouldn't blame it, right, for what happened. And I do think patients like Cindy, people like Cindy, can move forward, continue their carnivore diet, but also start to dig a little deeper and figure out why this may have happened.
Yeah. I mean, even in the wild, an animal eating the absolute most perfect species appropriate diet, getting all of the sun and the water and exercise that could be had, is still going to die. Like there will be some cause.
Yep.
All right. I got to go back to this broccoli and rice potato thing. So I have heard that if you have a little bit of carbs before a cholesterol test, that it can make your numbers come down. But do you think it's actually good for heart health? I'm like, is there a real benefit to that? In some cases, you think adding the broccoli, what would be the benefit, let's say, to the potato when it comes to heart health? Even if it makes your cholesterol lower on the test, is the potato helping heart health?
No, honest answer is no, I don't think it is.
No, honest answer is no, I don't think it is. It's
manipulating the number on the test, like you said. And again, Nick Norowitz's great, recent experiment of eating Oreos and lowering his cholesterol, basically invalidates that argument in my mind, right? That it's not really about lowering cholesterol. Now, again, nuance here, right? With someone like Cindy, I would want to look at those particle sizes. I would want to know, what was the quality of her cholesterol? Did she have a lot of those small, dense LDL particles that are problematic? Or, was most of her LDL cholesterol large cholesterol, which is not going to be problematic. That's some of the nuance that we get into. But, like I said, I know that these are ways that you can lower your cholesterol. I'm just not sure that they're beneficial, right?
That's
Talking
what I'm
about
saying.
all of these things.
Right. Okay. So if
That
you had found out, hey, Cindy, you've got tons of the bad type B,
right.
small sticky particles of LDL, tons of it, you're just loaded with it. Even then, I would really want to try to understand how would a potato, there are lots of people out there eating steak and potatoes, and I would not say that they are the picture of health necessarily.
Right.
Would the potato have helped even if we had known so much small, dense LDL? I, I guess I just wish. All right, at that point, would you then be like, all right, this woman has been doing carnivore for 4 years and she has tons of small type B LDL. So then we really need to look for what is causing that. But it's not going to be the meat. Would it be then those low levels of chronic inflammation? Is that when you would dig in deeper to that?
Yeah, it could be insulin resistance, that
Okay.
is still persisting, inflammation that's still persisting. Does she truly have a genetic predisposition towards, not high cholesterol per se that I'm worried about, but towards having more of the small, dense LDL that I am really worried about. And, maybe that is a situation, right? When you look at the whole picture and you say, okay, maybe there is a role here for lowering her cholesterol. Now this is where we get into a little bit of a problem, right? Because understand that statins don't really lower small, dense LDL. They disproportionately lower the large, fluffy LDL that's beneficial. So this is why I don't think statins are the answer, but I would put forth maybe one of the other cholesterol lowering modalities might have some usefulness in a situation like this. But again, I've rarely actually seen that situation. The more and more that I deal with patients like this, and the more and more we dig, usually we do find a reason, what's going on. And like I said, we find chronic mold, we find chronic Lyme disease, we find chronic periodontal disease, we find heavy metal toxicity, we find something, right? And we act upon that something, and lo and behold, the calcium score stops going up, right? It levels off, and that's what we look for. And those patients that the calcium score has leveled off in, those patients, I really do not see them having heart attacks. And, so I think if you get your calcium score stabilized, I think you're in a pretty good place. And like I said, the red flag when we first talked about Cindy's case was that calcium score was going up.
Yes.
And calcium scores going up, we know is risk for heart attack.
Okay. Would you have then wanted to do, you called in one of these for me. The last time you came, we discussed the ultrasound of my carotid arteries. Would that have been another test you would have wanted to see at that point?
It can maybe add a little bit more information about what's going on in terms of plaque in your body. Honestly, I don't oftentimes turn to that unless there's a specific reason, because again, we're looking where we're interested, right? We're looking at the plaque in the arteries. Now, sometimes the next step is get a more detailed look at the plaque in your arteries. And this is something else I may have brought up with a patient like Cindy. Perhaps we need to get a CT angiogram. This is a more detailed test where we get a better look at what's going on in your arteries. We see the soft plaque in addition to the calcified plaque. We see how narrowed the blood vessel is, right? The calcium score doesn't tell us how narrow the blood vessel is. A stress test doesn't tell us how narrow the blood vessel is. The only way to really see how narrow the blood vessel is either with a CT angiogram, so that's a CAT scan test, or with a cardiac catheterization, the invasive procedure where we go up through the blood vessel, either from the groin or from the wrist, and we actually are putting dye into the blood vessels of the heart, and we're seeing how blocked up they are. So someone with a rising CAC score, that's also a consideration. I think that oftentimes as physicians, we're not as aggressive as we should be in trying to diagnose the heart disease early, right? And that may have saved Cindy from a heart attack. She may still have ended up with a stent, but it would have been a stent before she had the heart attack, which is probably a better situation than getting the stent after you have the heart attack. Being proactive is something else that I am, I talk a lot about and put into practice in my practice.
Yeah. When you talk about inflammation, I did ask Cindy if she had, and she had tons of lab work, but I asked her, have you ever had your CRP or high sensitivity CRP levels checked? She couldn't find it on anything. Would that be a test that would indicate these low levels of inflammation? I get it done at least once per year myself in hopes
Yep.
of seeing it always at a 1 or below, and mine's typically more like 0.5. But would you suggest that for people as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I put that test is on my essential list of tests you need to get. And yeah, at least once a year, for the patients in my practice, for instance, we are usually doing it 3 or 4 times a year. And this is one of the key markers, right? You need to know if you have inflammation. So this has become a very interesting discussion, right? Because inflammation is coming to the forefront of heart disease. We talk about the medical system, right? And we talk about the failings of the medical system so much. And we talk about the fact that we have been overly focused on cholesterol when it comes to heart disease. And yet heart disease is not going away. It's getting worse. And to the credit of the community, right, the heart disease community, it has really started to become widely acknowledged that inflammation is a major player. There is even now a medication. It's called colchicine. It's an anti-inflammatory medication, and it has recently gotten an indication for the prevention of heart disease in people that have high inflammation. So checking your CRP is an essential test, C-reactive protein, or sometimes it's called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. This is an essential test that everyone should have as part of their routine blood panel. And, again, we can only guess. Would it have shown something in Cindy's case? I don't know. But what I can say is, again, my patients that have these rising CAC scores and they're not insulin resistant, oftentimes they do have the inflammation, and we need to figure out where that inflammation is coming from, and we need to mitigate it somehow, right?
Yeah.
Changing something in their diet or lifestyle, or changing something, or going to perhaps a medication to try and combat that inflammation. But I always go back to the first level of this discussion, right? Is there benefit to lowering your cholesterol?
Yeah.
And, that answer for people that are not insulin resistant and don't have inflammation, I think that answer is no, there's no benefit to lowering your cholesterol. For people that have inflammation and have insulin resistance, the high cholesterol certainly is problematic. I think there's more benefit to figuring out why you're insulin resistant or why you're inflamed and reversing those.
Yes.
But if you can't or don't want to put in the effort to take care of those, then yeah, there may be benefit to lowering your cholesterol in that context.
Can't you just hear everybody right now screaming at their screens up until the last minute or so of what you said? Cholesterol is good for us. Our brains are made of cholesterol. What does he mean we need to lower cholesterol? Because we have so in this community embraced cholesterol, which I mean, I think you and I can both make a really strong case for why our hormones and our brains, it's essential. We have to have it. And yet I hear what you're saying. If a person is inflamed or has insulin resistance, would you typically say insulin resistant if somebody is in the double digits of fasting insulin? Is that where you're still concerned? I've heard you say you would really like to see that at 9 or below. Is that right?
Yeah. So elevated fasting insulin level and anything above 10 essentially in the double digits, like you said, gets me thinking about that.
Yeah.
Is one of the indicators of insulin resistance, but it's not the only indicator, and this is something else to get into. If you're only looking at fasting insulin, you may not get a full picture about insulin resistance. So again, I like to test more. I like to go deeper. I like to at least use that fasting insulin level, combine it with your fasting glucose level, and go calculate your HOMA-IR, HOMAIR, online calculators to do that. You can look at that triglyceride to HDL ratio, right? Use that as an indicator of insulin resistance. Or my preferred way to test for it these days is with what is called an LPIR score, lipoprotein insulin resistance. The reason I like this so much, right, is because it gives me a lot of what I want to look at. It gives me the size of your particles, because this is based off of the advanced lipid panel, the NMR panel. And it tells me how insulin resistant you are. Ask your doctor for that test, the LPIR test, or go order it yourself, which you can do. That is what probably the best, most practical way to figure out if you're insulin resistant or not. And like I said, the note of caution here for your audience is I have seen long-term, very adherent, they're doing carnivore great.
Yes.
And yet they are still insulin resistant after a long period of time. And if you don't test for it, you're not going to know about it. And if you don't know about the insulin resistance, you may not know about the heart disease that's brewing, the cancer that's brewing, all of the problems related to insulin resistance that can still be brewing on a carnivore diet because we haven't reversed the insulin resistance. And again, we all like to avoid medications if possible, but sometimes it's not possible, right? And sometimes the answer for that real stubborn insulin resistance on someone, in someone who's doing a good carnivore diet might be a medication. I'm not saying I'm a big fan of these medications, but sometimes there are situations where they can be helpful, and they do help to improve insulin resistance. So we are considering them, and we are using them in some of our, patients that are doing the diet, right? And they're still insulin resistant. And for whatever reason, they still need that help to get over the insulin resistance.
Yes. Cindy, even though she is about to turn 69, we say she's been doing this a whole 5 years is incredible. But also, if I've done my math correctly, that is more than 60 years of not carnivore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I would like to cover for people who say, all right, I don't want to take the medications, and I am doing the carnivore diet. I always like to give the real quick rundown of the top ways to fix insulin resistance. Avoid the junk that's going to be spiking glucose all day long. Eat the food that has the least amount of effect on your glucose, which is going to be nice fatty meats. It's going to have just the least effect on glucose all day. Use muscles. So if somebody can and will, resistance training, or at least take some walks, go up a hill once in a while, like use your muscle to slurp up that extra glucose. Get sleep, really imperative for insulin resistance, and stress management, because your diet can be on point. And if you are stressed all day long, glucose is still going to be all over the place and insulin resistant. Anything else you would like to add to that list?
Yeah, the only thing I might add is getting some sunlight, is probably the other one that's going to help you here.
Yeah, that's solid.
So, one of the first steps, right, when we're trying to work through this problem of I'm on a carnivore diet and something bad has happened is, are you really doing a carnivore diet? And, it's not always an intentional thing, right? People think they're doing the carnivore diet, and yet they're doing not the carnivore diet, right? I mean, I've had people who have, they say, oh, I'm doing carnivore, I'm only eating meat. And then we're like, okay, what do you drink, right? And they're like, oh, I drink a Coca-Cola a couple of times a day, right? Yes. And they're like, but I'm not eating it, right? I'm still carnivore. Right. Or, the people that are like, well, someone said I can have honey while I'm on my carnivore diet, right? Yeah. And for some people, yes, you can have honey when you're on a carnivore diet. But if you're insulin resistant, no, you can't be having honey while you're on your carnivore diet. And
Yes.
so, we can't forget about those basics as we also explore the deeper issues that come up.
Yeah. And I do not think that is the case for Cindy. But I also think her case is really unusual. And I do think that what you're saying is true. Many people who say I'm doing carnivore are still including a whole lot of not animal products. So thank you for putting that out there. All right. In the hospital, Cindy said that a doctor specifically said to her, carnivore is simply not working for you. So we need a different diet. You work with heart patients all day long. You've mentioned several things that you sometimes do change, like, hey, the mold situation, the Lyme situation, perhaps you were insulin resistant for so many years, that's not coming down. So there may be medications. But do you ever say, look, we've got to revamp this diet, give up the carnivore thing, and go to something else because this just simply isn't working?
The more common discussion that I'm having with patients is, that low fat diet that you've been on, we
Yeah.
need to revamp it, right?
Okay.
And, you can accuse me, I guess, of cognitive bias just as much as you can accuse her doctor that told her, well, it's obviously the carnivore, right? Because it's not obviously the carnivore. One other thing I guess that we haven't brought up, right, is that it's possible, right, again, that Cindy could have had this heart attack sooner if she wasn't doing carnivore.
Yes.
Carnivore may not have fully prevented it, but maybe it slowed down that path that she was already on. Knowing what her CAC score was prior to carnivore or, right after starting carnivore, will give us a sense of how much accumulated damage she may have had, like you said, in the 60 plus years that she wasn't doing carnivore. And yes, it continued to progress on carnivore, but maybe it wasn't progressing as quickly as it would have if she had never found carnivore.
That's a really good point. So
Yeah.
when she first was starting, she was already in the 82nd percentile on her
Okay.
CAC.
Yeah, there was already significant damage there. And so again, it's hard to look at this and say, okay, you had 60 plus years of not carnivore. You had 5 years of carnivore. You had a heart attack. Clearly, it was the 5 years of carnivore that did it, right? No one would really logically come to that conclusion. And yet, if you asked 100 cardiologists, I guarantee you 100 of them would give that same answer, right? Maybe if you got 1,000, right, you would finally find me who says that's not the answer.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of time, that's going to be the answer because, again, that's how the cardiology community views heart disease. It is cholesterol first and foremost, and in many cases, it is cholesterol only. And it's easy to point to the cholesterol. It's hard, right, to go through everything we've gone through in this hour. And I can tell you, it takes many hours of working with patients like Cindy to really start to figure this out. And that's hard. It's a lot easier to say, go take this medication, lower your cholesterol, don't worry about it. But I can tell you, again, like I said, I've seen a lot more situations where that approach doesn't work than I have seen situations where this approach, didn't work.
Yeah, the statistics on the people who actually have a heart incident, what their LDL levels are, it is not compelling to make people want to necessarily lower all of their cholesterol and LDL. Like very similar stats for the people with low LDL to high LDL on who's having them. So
it is. And then the percentage of patients that have heart attacks these days that are on statins is very high, right? And everyone looks at that and says, well, we didn't start the statin soon enough, or we didn't give a high enough dose of it.
yeah.
And no one looks at it and says, maybe the statin didn't help, right? I've never heard a cardiologist in a situation like this say that statin just isn't working for you. Let's try something else.
Wow, wouldn't that be kind of refreshing though? Okay, one more question before we sort of summarize. Could you just briefly touch on the ApoB test? I asked Cindy if she had ever had one done, and she said no, and I haven't either.
Yeah. So ApoB is another way of looking at cholesterol. The specifics of ApoB, right? So ApoB is a protein that occurs that is on certain of these cholesterol carrying particles in our bloodstream. And that includes all LDL particles have ApoB on them, but also other particles like VLDL have ApoB on them.
Okay.
Because LDL is such a lousy predictor of heart disease risk, the cardiology community has largely turned to ApoB as a better marker of heart disease risk. And it is a better marker of heart disease risk. And the reason it's a better marker is because it's not just looking at LDL, it's looking at VLDL, or sometimes what's more broadly called remnant cholesterol. And it turns out that VLDL, remnant cholesterol, and some of the LDL is problematic, right? But like we said earlier, it's only the small, dense LDL that's problematic. The large LDL isn't. So when we get people with a high ApoB, we still have the same problem as when we're looking at people with a high LDL. We don't know if that ApoB is high because they have a lot of VLDL and they have a lot of small, dense LDL, which I agree is a problematic situation. Or is your ApoB high because you have a lot of large LDL, which may not be a problematic situation? And it still leaves us in the same problem, the same situation as if we're just looking at LDL. And this is why I'm such a fan of just get the advanced cholesterol test. It does give us the information that we need. It's not that expensive of a test. And it's well worth it in terms of the information that it provides. So again, if your doctor is telling you you have high LDL, or they're a more advanced doctor and they're telling you you have high ApoB,
Yes.
the answer is still, I want an advanced lipid panel. I
And
want to know
what's that called?
Yeah, it's either called an advanced lipid panel or it's called an NMR panel, nuclear magnetic resonance panel. Okay. I want to know what my particle sizes are. That is really the key information that we need to know.
The last time you came on the channel, that's what we were going over of mine was the particle size test. Okay. Yep. I didn't even realize that's what you call an advanced cholesterol panel. All right. Good to know. Okay. To wrap this up for people, Dr. Ovadia, we've covered a lot of territory here. It's not a small topic. So the 5 things that we covered as far as lowering our insulin, always a good thing to do. If somebody says, gosh, I'm sitting on my couch all day eating a bunch of sugar and carbs, where should I start? Yes, start with those 5. The first 2 are both diet. Cut out the junk, eat the good stuff, move your body, sleep, stress management. Start there. If you're already doing those things and somebody sees, oh my gosh, my CAC score is still going up, even though I'm doing all of these things so right, which I do think Cindy's case is pretty unusual. Most of the time, I don't know about you, you would have a much better idea. Like, wow, good job, Cindy. Those 5 things are really helping your health. But if it's still an increasing CAC score, then you would want to see what is your inflammation. So check your high sensitivity CRP and then get some of those tests for insulin resistance. And I will link and put a lot of those down below as well. And I know I use ownyourlabs.com. I have some lab work ready to go right now, and they can do a lot of these tests. Obviously,
I think all of the tests that we've mentioned you can get through Own Your Labs. You can get the LPIR score. You can certainly get your fasting insulin and your glucose and figure out your HOMA-IR score. You can get, the CRP test. And again, I would even kind of flip that, right? You said if your CAC score is going up, get these tests. I would be getting these tests on a regular basis. You want to know whether or not you have inflammation. You want to know whether or not you have insulin resistance, regardless of what might be happening with your CAC score.
Okay, that's a great point too. And I know you can also, through Own Your Labs, order that advanced cholesterol, the particle size testing as well. I do want to point out, you cannot order a CAC score. Can't do that on here. I wish people would love that. Okay. And then if they do find insulin resistance is still an issue. You still want to keep doing these 5 things. Just note there could also be a need for some medication, potentially. And if you're still inflamed, dig deeper. I know that Danny Conway is really into root cause healing. Judy Cho will help to search for, is it Lyme? Is it mold? Digging deeper. So if their regular practitioner is not willing to look for the cause of the inflammation, find somebody who will, because there's your problem, right? It's not just the food that we're putting in. Yes, these 5 things can help, but if there is deep-seated inflammation, this is a really good reminder that you can't out-eat or outrun deep-seated chronic health problems.
Yeah. And I think, again, the high-level message is, carnivore is great, but it doesn't solve everything. And you still need to be paying attention to, health issues that might be brewing. And again, the fact that those issues continue to brew doesn't negate the carnivore diet. It
Right.
just means that there are other factors that we need to look at.
Yeah, that's a good way to sum it up too. That doesn't mean scrap this amazing diet. You just might need a little more, right? Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ovadia. My heart has been really heavy, honestly, since hearing Cindy's story, because it sort of upset the whole idea of we're team meat. We don't have to worry anymore. Like, maybe. So thanks for bringing some clarity and answers. I am so grateful for you, and I hope this will be helpful. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Always great to be with you.
Bye-bye.